actually moved to Havens Rock 3 years ago to write about the mysterious monastery, but things turned out differently. My name is Tyson Miller, and in this story, I tell how I lived in a haunted hotel. I was bored out of my mind, but this job required stamina and discipline. I was an author and wrote extensive reports about real haunted places and published them as books. I could make a good living from it, but the job was more for me. The supernatural simply fascinated me. It was a passion to write about it. My greatest wish was to write a report about the strange monastery in Havens Rock. But this turned out to be more difficult than usual. Normally, the owners of the cursed places were happy about my project, after all. It meant free marketing for them. But the monastery in Havens Rock was different. I wasn't let in when I rang the bell at the main gate. There was no email address I could write to, and apparently they didn't even have a phone. Now I was once again sitting in my car outside the main gate of the monastery, waiting for something to happen. Even if someone had come out to water the flowers, that would have been a highlight. While I waited, I went back through the documents with all the knowledge about the monastery that I'd gathered so far. The most interesting thing was that experts claimed that the monastery was older than it wanted to admit. It was supposed to be built in the 13th century, but according to these experts, who were able to prove their thesis, the monastery was over 10,000 years old. This would mean that it was far older than the Christian religion itself, which would make no sense for a supposedly Christian monastery. The few geological scans that were made in the 2000s are also interesting. They show that there's a tunnel system with a huge underground complex beneath the monastery. So why would someone build something like this under a monastery? Or was the monastery perhaps built above the complex? Was it just a kind of camouflage? Until the 1970s, the monastery was open and friendly. You could even come here to pray. The sisters of the order were open-minded and popular throughout Havens Rock. Then something changed. No one had seen any of the sisters since the mid-70s. They no longer left the convent, and no one was allowed to enter. Well, no one except the supplier from the supermarket who delivered food every week. I tried to talk to one of the suppliers about the convent, but he ignored me. I imagined I recognized a panic in his eyes when I asked him about the monastery. Damn. I wanted to know what was going on. Towards evening, I drove home and knew it was time for a new project. I desperately needed to publish a new book. The sales of my old books were slowly dwindling. There were some dark legends here in Havens Rock, but I specialized in haunted places. Any legends, they were no good to me. Now, when I spoke to George Howard about it, he had an idea. The 50-year-old George, who occasionally did assistant work for me, mentioned a hotel up in the mountains, the North Star Hotel. There had been a number of murders and mysterious deaths there that had never, ever been solved. As far as he knew, it had closed a long time ago, and I could certainly just drive by. I had experience with such things, and I knew that there could be trouble if you entered a site without authorization, so I searched the internet for the current owner of the North Star Hotel, and I only found one phone number. But it looked very old. It was actually too few numbers for today. Nevertheless, I gave it a try, and I was surprised. North Star Hotel, you're talking to Julie. How can I help you? This is Tyson Miller. I want to write a report about the North Star Hotel, and I wanted to ask if it's okay for me to enter the premises. A report? That sounds interesting, but what do you mean by entering the premises? Would you like to book a room? A room? I thought the hotel was closed. Thank God it's not, she said. Then I'd be out of a job. Sir, if you'd like, I can book something for you. I thought, well, yes, please book 2 rooms. No, 3. In the name of Tyson Miller, I'll bring 2 more assistants with me. Very well, Mr. Miller. I'm sure Mr. Ulrich will be pleased that someone is writing about our good house. When would you like to arrive? I booked for Monday next week. I would stay in the supposedly cursed hotel for a week, which should be enough time to gather impressions. George was surprised and thought I was pulling his leg when I told him that the hotel wasn't closed and that I had even reserved rooms for us. I thought it was funny that I really had to persuade him to spend a week there. He didn't really believe it was haunted, did he? The interesting thing about these haunted places were the stories and the myths. Not actual ghosts floating around with the sheets over their heads saying boo, though. Eventually, I was able to persuade him, just like Tanya Bryce. The young student was at home on Havens Rock for the semester break and needed a good vacation job. She'd already done a few jobs for me and had always been reliable. On the drive to the hotel, George kept repeating that he didn't think the hotel was open and that I must have dialed the wrong number. He kept repeating the same phrase like a mantra. When we took the entrance to the parking lot, he had to change his mind. There were a lot of cars there, and none of them were rusty. The hotel also looked in good shape from the outside. Sure, the style was a bit dated, but the condition of the building couldn't have been better. George stood rooted to the spot in the parking lot and scratched his head while I dragged our bags inside. Good thing I paid him to do that. As we queued at reception, the last doubts left. The entrance hall was beautiful, illuminated by dozens of old, magnificent chandeliers. The music from the 20s rounded off the ambiance. You really felt transported back in time. I also found it funny that the elderly lady in front of us in line had coordinated her clothes with the hotel. She was wearing a peach-colored combination of a skirt and a blazer that looked as if she'd stolen it from 1925. Just great. Then it was finally our turn. It was Julie who greeted us and also remembered our phone call. Before she gave us our room keys, she was keen to introduce us to Mr. Ulrich. Mr. Ulrich was a fat guy with a bald head wearing a brown corduroy jacket. I hadn't seen anything like him for years. Mr. Miller, I'm glad you're here. Julie has already told me that you're planning to write about the North Star. You wouldn't believe how much that means to me. I replied with, "Thank you, Mr. Ulrich. I'm glad you appreciate my work." He said, "You absolutely must attend our monthly ball night on Friday evening. It's always a fantastic event, and if you need anything, just let me know. For now, glad you're here, and I hope you have a pleasant stay." Mr. Ulrich was really very nice. He'd probably heard that there's always a big influx of new customers after my reports are published. So it was no wonder that he liked me. When I got to my room, the first thing I did was unpack my MacBook. I wanted to start writing straight away because my first impression was still fresh. That's what my great role model, Aidan Goodman, always did. In my opinion, he was the greatest writer who ever wrote anything. His book about No More and freeing the slaves and the conspiracy he uncovered in Moxton, the man was just incredible. His son Jimmy was getting on in years himself, but kept his memory alive with the Aidan Goodman Foundation. I wish that in 70 years' time someone might feel the same way about me and my work. While I was typing a few lines at my desk, I noticed a strange noise. It sounded like a soft knocking. I got up and followed the noise to the bathroom, where it was the loudest. Then it strangely stopped. Back at my desk, I wondered about my last paragraph. It had the word blood at the end in capital letters. Had I written that? I couldn't remember. When Tanya and George knocked on my door, I flinched. Somehow I was tense, but I couldn't say why. The two of them were picking me up for dinner. We went down to the dining room together and felt kind of shabby. The other guests at the tables were wearing elegant evening dresses and tuxedos. We were wearing jeans, and I had a t-shirt with the words Bikini Inspector on it. But contrary to my expectations, no one treated us in a downward manner. All the guests and the staff in the large dining room greeted us, nodded politely, and wished us a pleasant stay. Apparently, word had gotten around that we had written a report about the hotel. The well-dressed waiter took our orders and recommended the wine of the day, which we ordered. Shortly afterward, a lady in a white ball gown and an elaborate pinned-up hairstyle came over to us and approached me. "Hello, darling, I am Odetta Marlene, but I'm sure you've heard of me." Well, I hadn't, but I wouldn't tell her that for now. I heard you and your friends want to write about the North Star," she said. "What a great plan. If you're going to write about the hotel, you have to write about the guests too, because they're what make a place like this, you know, darling. Some of us are regular guests. We can't get enough of the North Star, you could say. When I find him, I'll bring our most prominent guest to your table. Ian Whiteberg is a big fan of literature of all kinds. It would certainly be an advantage if one of the most up-and-coming young politicians was a fan of yours, wouldn't it, darling?" she said. Then she winked at George and left our table. I didn't begrudge George it, but the man was 10 years older than her and had at least 7 holes in his shirt. Judging by the look on his face, he was just as surprised as I was. Tanya, however, seemed to enjoy the whole thing, and I couldn't blame her. The North Star and its guests had a certain charm that couldn't be denied. The food was simply great. Tanya and I had both ordered the steak, and George, who was a vegetarian, had penne with pesto and pine nuts. As I was forcing down the remains of this sumptuous but really good steak, a young man, perhaps in his mid-30s, came over to us. He was wearing a tuxedo. He had his hair combed to one side and a discreet mustache. "Blood," he said. Somehow, that word scared me. "Excuse me," I said. "That wouldn't be enough blood for me. I like my steak bloody." "Ha, a little joke. I'm Ian Whiteberg. Nice to meet you," said the young politician. He shook my hand, but he only had eyes for Tanya. I still found it strange that he was supposedly such a well-known politician, even though we had never heard of him. In conversation, he told us that he'd been living here for a long time because, he was well looked after and that the food was just so good. I couldn't argue with that. I found him nice and charming, but somehow also childish and quite self-centered. It also seemed to me that he was carrying some kind of secret with him. Then he left us, and we had a mousse au chocolat for dessert. Later, I wrote down my impressions in my room and wanted to do some research on this Ian Whiteberg character. Strangely enough, the internet didn't work here. Neither on my MacBook nor on my phone. Now, this was odd and quite a hindrance because I couldn't tell whether it would do me any harm if I wrote something negative about the politician. I guess I just had to write and then do some research at home. My heart almost stopped again. I don't know why I was so tense. It was George knocking on my door again. He looked confused and a little scared. Me? I was in my room reading. Then I noticed that the bathroom door was closed, but I knew I'd left it open. And what can I say? There's someone in there. I can hear someone humming, but that's not possible. Figured that was just your thing, boss. George was right. It actually was. But I was still puzzled, so I took my smartphone to take some footage and I went over to George's room with him. The door to the bathroom was actually locked, but I didn't hear anyone humming or singing. George took my phone and filmed while I carefully opened the door. A waft of steam came toward us and clouded the lens of my iPhone. Someone must have been taking a very hot bath in there, but the tub was empty. Neither a person nor bath water could be seen in it. So, there was all this steam coming from anyway. And there was something else. There were clearly wet footprints on the floor. That was absolutely crazy. To be honest, I had never encountered anything truly supernatural in my entire career. But this left no doubt that an inexplicable force was at work. I had a hard time convincing George that it was safe to sleep in his room and not mine. If there was a ghost in his room, he wouldn't want to kill it. He would want to bathe with it, I said. George laughed and was somewhat reassured. The next day, Mr. Ulrich joined us at the breakfast table and told us the theme for the ball night on Friday. Red as the devil it was. The men were all to wear red bow ties, which they were given free of charge at reception, and the women were asked to wear red ball gowns. Well, I doubted that Tanya had a ball gown with her, but we were sure to drop by anyway. That afternoon, we shot a video in my room for the YouTube channel, which I was promoting my excursions on into the unknown. The rest of the day was relatively uneventful. That was the case with my work more often than you would think. However, the night was different. I had strange nightmares in which everything revolved around blood. Then I woke up because I heard noises in the hallway. It sounded like a wild party was going on. Loud laughter from women and men, clapping and cheering, even some music. You're crazy, I thought to myself. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I stomped angrily to the door, opened it, and stood in the dark. The light in the hallway was off, which was strange for a hotel. It was also strange that there was no party going on and the noises had just disappeared. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I was even more confused. In the dark, the hallway looked somehow shabby, old and run down, as if I was standing in a dilapidated ruin. Then the light came back on, and I saw a clean hallway with elegant lamps on the wall and an expensive-looking red carpet. Had my eyes been playing tricks on me? Or had it been my mind? Or was there more to it than that? I went back to my room and tried to access the internet again, and I managed to load Google. But then the browser crashed. Damn. I fell asleep while laboring to try to get Google back on the screen. In the time leading up to prom night, we noticed a few more strange things like noises in the night or lights flickering, but otherwise it was quiet. Ball night was coming, and on Friday morning I arranged to meet George and Tanya at the ballroom at 9 p.m. so they can have a few hours off beforehand. After all, they'd earned it. When I collected my red bow tie from the nice Julie downstairs at reception, I ran into Ian. He smiled at me and told me how dazzling I looked. Well, I was wearing pajamas and had bags under my eyes, but I don't know what he meant. What a strange contemporary man. After that, I tried researching on the internet again and was actually able to load a few pages on Google about the North Star Hotel. However, when I clicked on the pages, I always got the message that I had no internet connection. Crap. It was already late. I had to try again later. Now it was time to put on my sacco and red bow tie and head into the fray. George was already wearing a sacco and, to be honest, looked a bit funny with the red bow tie. Tanya, on the other hand, looked anything but funny. She was wearing a beautiful old red ball gown, had her hair done up, and was wearing lipstick. I didn't know her or almost recognize her like that. She told us that our favorite politician, Mr. Ian Whiteberg, had sent her the dress. I could tell by the look on her face that she wasn't averse to his advances. Good for her. But I'd rather stay away from the guy. He was a little odd. We walked into the ballroom together and were overwhelmed by a sea of red. There were red balloons. The women were all wearing red. There were red carpets and red confetti. There was a lot going on the dance floor. I had to stop for a moment at the punch and start to collect myself. It said blood in big letters. Julie poured out the blood. "Hello, Mr. Miller. Would you like some blood?" "It's actually damn tasty cherry punch," she said. I took a glass, but I still felt uncomfortable. The word had been haunting me ever since we got there. The others, well, they seemed to like the cherry punch too. They finished their glasses in no time. "Tell me, have you ever seen any other guests?" I asked the two of them. "Are you blind? Why don't you take a look around?" Tanya replied. That's not what I mean. I mean like in the corridors or in the elevator. Someone just going to their room. I haven't seen anyone yet." "Well, I haven't seen anyone either," George replied, shrugging his shoulders. It was probably nothing, but I thought it was strange. George then was whisked away to the dance floor by Odetta Marlene. She really seemed to be after him. I went to the bar to get something harder than the punch, and when I went back to Tanya, I saw that Ian Whiteberg was now standing with her, and they were both talking animatedly. I wasn't in the mood for the slime and preferred to stay at the bar. There I talked to Lloyd, the nice barman, for a while. I was sure I knew his face from somewhere. Say, Lloyd, you look familiar, or at least you look like someone. When I see you, I think of the name Robert Grayson, but I can't remember who it is. That name means nothing to me, sir. I'm Lloyd, the bartender. I always have been, you know. Another brandy? Lloyd was nice, but something wasn't right there. Tanya was now dancing closely with the politician, and I couldn't see George anywhere. He was probably already in his room. So I went upstairs too. No matter how long it took, I would try to get an internet connection again. A little tipsy, I walked over to the elevators and pressed the button. When the elevator arrived and the doors opened, someone threw red confetti in my face. The only problem was the elevator was empty. Where was the confetti coming from? Somehow I didn't want to get in the elevator and preferred to take the stairs. In my room, I was able to open Google and entered Odetta Marlene. And sure enough, after almost an hour, I managed to load a page with an article about her. The photo, well, it also matched the woman I had seen. Then I felt very uneasy. The article was called Odetta Marlene, the Black Widow of Havens Rock. Marlene had 11 husbands, all of whom she murdered in treacherous ways. She also tortured the slaves in her house in the country. She treated them terribly. When she was found out, she retreated to the North Star Hotel where, according to rumors, she killed herself. Well, that couldn't be true. I had only just seen the woman. I Googled again, this time typing in Ian Whiteberg, North Star Hotel. The article was even more frightening than the one about Odetta. Ian Whiteberg, the butcher of Havens Rock. The son of wealthy entrepreneurs, he was on his way to becoming governor and had plans to become president. At some point, however, it came to light that his parents were trying to hide something about him with their money. The police found out that Whiteberg had been dragging a trail of corpses behind him since his childhood. He'd slaughtered 12 young women and men, sometimes eating them alive and drinking their blood. He was holed up in his favorite hotel, the North Star Hotel on Havens Rock, and was finally shot dead by police in the ballroom during an escape attempt. Article from the Havens Rock Times. January 29th, 1931. What? Oh, that couldn't be. I suddenly felt dizzy, but it wasn't from the alcohol. I looked up and found myself in a dark, dirty room. The bed I was sitting on was full of rat droppings, and the mattress was more than just moldy. I immediately jumped up. I had no idea what this was. Was it all some kind of illusion? And if it really was haunted, the three of us had to get out of here immediately. I raced over to George's room. The door was open. I went in, but didn't see him. Then I went into the bathroom and almost threw up. Odetta Marlene was sitting on a stool next to the bathtub smoking a cigarette. George was lying in the bathtub. The water was hot and produced a lot of steam, but I could clearly see what she had done to him. His wrists were slit lengthwise, and the floor of the bathroom was completely covered in his blood. George was dead. "I'm single again, darling. Interested?" the ghost said. I ran as fast as I could to Tanya's room. Ian Whiteberg was even worse, and was probably up to something similar with her. I kicked in the door without knocking, but the entire room was empty. Good, I thought. I hurried down the stairs and made my way to the ballroom. Julie was standing at the punch station. Her entire scalp was missing, so you could see straight down to her skull. Her throat was also slit. Whiteberg had probably scalped her. "Would you like another glass of blood, Mr. Miller?" asked Julie. No, I certainly didn't want that, I thought to myself. The ballroom lost all of its splendor. The dancing couples disappeared, and only Tanya remained, with Ian Whiteberg standing next to her. Tanya's stomach had been open. Ian had hung her intestines around her neck. There was a hole in her throat with a straw from which the psychopath drank her blood. "Hello, champ, you look dazzling," he said, toasting me with his glass. Mr. Ulrich and Lloyd, the bartender, now approached me. They didn't look as if they were still friendly towards me. I ran out of the hotel without hesitation. I was no longer able to help Tanya and George. After a few attempts, my car started and I took off. I couldn't forgive myself for having George and Tanya on my conscience. After all, I had persuaded them to come with me. It was my fault. I had to live with that now. Hey, horror fans, want to learn more about the strange island, Havens Rock? Then click here on the next video and subscribe.